They laughed at me, mocked my uniform, and tried to erase everything I had worked for. But they didn't know I was planning my ultimate comeback. I had dedicated my life to the Army. Years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and missions most civilians couldn't even imagine. I gave everything, my youth, my health, my honor. But when I returned home, I discovered that the very people I trusted, my so-called colleagues, even some of my own family, had mocked my service and belittled my accomplishments. They didn't see the medals, the scars, or the sleepless nights. They only saw the uniform, and in their eyes, it was easy to dismiss me. I remember the day vividly. I walked into the local community hall for a veterans meeting, only to hear whispers, snickers, and outright laughter. Even some old friends made jokes about my deployments, as if the life-threatening situations I had faced were material for their entertainment. I tried to ignore it, to hold my head high, but deep down, anger burned hotter than any mission I had survived. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to stay the victim, not anymore. I would reclaim my dignity and make them regret ever underestimating an Army man. They thought mocking me would break me, but little did they know I had been quietly watching, waiting, and planning my payback. After that humiliating meeting, I went home and sat in silence, staring at my Army medals, each one representing blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Every laugh, every sarcastic remark replayed in my mind like a broken record. I couldn't forget it. And that's when I realized the truth. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes it must be demanded. I began meticulously documenting everything. The people who mocked me, the lies they spread, the attempts to belittle my accomplishments, names, dates, conversations. I recorded it all. Not out of obsession, but necessity. If I was going to make them pay, I needed facts, concrete evidence that their arrogance and cruelty wouldn't stand in the face of truth. Then I started researching how to leverage what I had, my skills, my connections, and most importantly, my reputation in military circles. I reached out to old commanders, colleagues, and even veterans I had helped during deployments. Slowly, I built a network, a silent army of support ready to back me up. Every day, I visualized my comeback. It wasn't going to be petty. It wasn't going to be small. It was going to be clever, undeniable, and unforgettable. I imagined the moment they would realize that the man they laughed at was now untouchable, respected, and unstoppable. And as I drafted my plan, I realized something terrifying. If executed perfectly, their shock wouldn't just embarrass them. It could change their entire perception of me forever. They laughed at my uniform, mocked my service, and called me irrelevant. But the very people who humiliated me would soon bow before the truth. Weeks turned into months as I quietly executed my plan. Every step was calculated, every move deliberate. I knew that real revenge wasn't about anger. It was about precision, and precision required patience. I started small. I reached out to my old Army contacts, sharing updates about my career, highlighting the projects I had led and the operations I had completed successfully. I did it subtly, never boasting, just letting facts speak. Soon people began to take notice. Old colleagues who had once ignored me now invited me to speak at military events. Invitations poured in. My achievements, once belittled by those around me, were now gaining recognition in circles that mattered. Then came the first test. One of the officers who had publicly mocked me at the last reunion contacted me, pretending to be friendly. I smiled politely, asking about his life, his career. He laughed. "You still take this Army stuff so seriously? Come on, lighten up." But I could see it in his eyes, the recognition of my quiet rise. He was scared, though he wouldn't admit it, and that scared look felt sweeter than any victory I had ever imagined. But I didn't stop there. I knew that real payback required more than recognition. It required undeniable proof of my competence and influence. So I started a project to help struggling veterans transition back into civilian life, combining my military knowledge with practical skills like discipline, fitness, and leadership. I reached out to NGOs, to corporations, to anyone who could benefit from my expertise. Word spread fast. I became known as someone who not only served his country, but continued to serve its people long after leaving active duty. Then, the tipping point arrived. The very people who had mocked me, the colleagues, the ex-friends, the opportunists, saw my name in publications, heard my speeches, and witnessed the influence I now wielded. They were forced to acknowledge that the man they had ridiculed wasn't just back on his feet. He was soaring above them. I decided it was time to confront them, but in a way that ensured maximum impact. I arranged a military alumni gathering, inviting all the officers who had ever doubted me. I knew they wouldn't expect me to attend. They assumed I had faded into obscurity, but I showed up, polished, confident, and respected, wearing my old Army uniform with pride, medals gleaming under the banquet lights. The room fell silent the moment I entered. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, whispers spread like wildfire. The same people who had laughed now looked unsure, uncomfortable, even guilty. I walked through the room, exchanging polite nods and handshakes, letting the tension build. Each step was a reminder I was no longer the target. They were. When the main presentation began, I took the stage. I didn't start by addressing my humiliation. I let it unfold naturally. I spoke about my projects, my work with veterans, my commitment to service beyond the battlefield. Every slide, every anecdote, every statistic demonstrated my competence and influence. I watched as their smug expressions turned into shock, then into awe. And then I revealed my final move. I presented a documentary I had been secretly producing for months, highlighting the lives I had transformed, the careers I had saved, the impact I had created. Their laughter, their mocking comments, they were erased by the undeniable proof of my achievements. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to demand respect. It was earned in real time, witnessed by everyone present. By the end of the night, the air had changed. Former critics approached me cautiously, offering handshakes, apologies, and even praise. I smiled, knowing that true revenge isn't in words, it's in actions, in success, in showing people that underestimating you is their greatest mistake. That night, as I left the hall, I realized something important. My journey of payback wasn't about punishing them. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my pride, and my life. And in doing so, I had created a legacy far more powerful than any insult or humiliation could destroy. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. The seeds of my next move had already been planted, and the full scope of my comeback was yet to be revealed. Quote, "They thought my life was over, that I was defeated, but the secret I had been hiding would shatter their world completely." After the alumni gathering, I returned home with a sense of calm determination. The night had been satisfying, but I knew true payback required more than just public recognition. I had to hit where it would hurt the most, where my betrayers would never see it coming. I remembered the countless nights I spent serving overseas, the missions where I risked everything for my country, the medals I had earned, and the classified projects I had been part of. Those projects were sensitive, top secret, and far beyond the comprehension of anyone who had ever mocked me. And yet, the people who had betrayed and humiliated me had no idea that I still held leverage, information that could change lives, careers, and reputations forever. I started by reaching out to key contacts from my Army days. Carefully, I documented everything I could reveal without breaking the law, highlighting the projects I had contributed to and the intelligence I had gathered. Every detail was precise, professional, and utterly undeniable. Then, with careful planning,
I began using my network to quietly influence outcomes in ways that would subtly but inevitably expose the incompetence and arrogance of those who had laughed at me. One morning, I received a call from one of my former colleagues, the very person who had led the mockery against me years ago. He sounded nervous, almost hesitant. He said, "I heard about your latest project. Impressive work." I smiled, knowing the tone had changed from condescension to fear. I said, "Thank you," casually, letting my calm confidence speak volumes. Little did he know I had prepared a subtle surprise, a controlled revelation that would make him regret every cruel word. The first impact was public, but indirect. An anonymous tip led to a review of certain outdated protocols that my former detractors had implemented. Mistakes and neglect that they thought were buried forever were now exposed. Their credibility suffered, their reputations wavered, and whispers of their incompetence began spreading. And all the while, I remained unseen, a silent force orchestrating the consequences of their arrogance. At the same time, I focused on the people closest to me, my family. I realized that my past anger and resentment could not control my actions. I needed a balance of strategy and compassion. I carefully rebuilt bridges with those that mattered, ensuring my life was no longer defined by betrayal, but by resilience and growth. I reached out to veterans, neighbors, and friends who had witnessed my struggles. Their support became my shield, my reinforcement, and my reminder that true victory isn't just revenge, it's restoration. Then came the final revelation. At a private reunion of my former officers, I subtly revealed the secret I had held on to all these years. Evidence of my contribution to high-level operations that directly impacted national security. Faces paled, conversations stopped. Those who had mocked me could no longer deny my value, my intelligence, and my integrity. The embarrassment was palpable, the humiliation poetic. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. I let the silence, the shocked expressions, and the realization of their underestimation speak for me. Revenge, I learned, was most powerful when silent, methodical, and undeniable. The people who had hurt me now understood that I was not just a survivor, I was a force to be reckoned with. At the end of that week, my life had transformed again. I wasn't defined by the ridicule of others or the betrayals I had endured. I was defined by my resilience, my strategic mind, and the quiet power I had wielded while everyone else slept on my potential. The lesson was clear. Never underestimate the one you've wronged, because sometimes the most devastating revenge is the one you never see coming. As I sat alone that evening, I reflected on the path I had taken. The anger and hurt were gone, replaced with satisfaction, pride, and a new sense of purpose. And deep down, I knew that my journey wasn't over. The next chapter of my life would not just be about revenge. It would be about ensuring that every action I took left a lasting impact, not just on my former detractors, but on the world I had sworn to protect.
Little did anyone know, the most shocking chapter was yet to come. The one that would blend emotion, justice, and a lesson they would never forget. They thought I was done, that I had nothing left, but what I did next left them trembling in disbelief. Weeks after the subtle revenge, life seemed to return to a steady rhythm, but I knew the final act was still ahead. This was the moment where all the pieces would fall into place. I had planned carefully, measured every step, and ensured that the truth would hit harder than anyone could imagine. It started with a quiet invitation. I reached out to those who had publicly mocked me during my service years, my former peers, the colleagues who had disrespected my contributions, and even the superiors who had turned a blind eye. They thought it was a reunion, an opportunity to reminisce about our shared military experiences. Little did they know, it was the stage for my ultimate
confrontation. As they arrived one by one, confident and unsuspecting, I welcomed them with calm precision. Conversations flowed at first, filled with polite smiles and nostalgic stories, but I could see the faint unease creeping in, subtle but unmistakable. They sensed that something was different. Something was off. Then I revealed the first piece of the puzzle, the classified documents I had managed to preserve from my army missions. I displayed them carefully, highlighting the critical role I had played in operations that had gone unnoticed. Every detail was verifiable, leaving no room for doubt. The murmurs began immediately. Faces paled. Whispers turned to gasps. The arrogance they had carried for years began crumbling. But I wasn't done. Next, I introduced evidence of their negligence. The decisions they had made that had endangered missions, ignored vital intelligence, or undermined team morale. Each revelation was precise, each mistake undeniable. They tried to argue, to downplay their errors, but the proof was irrefutable. The room was thick with tension, every word I spoke dripping with the weight of truth and the power of calculated revenge. I paused for effect, letting the silence amplify the impact. Their expressions were priceless, a mixture of shock, regret, and fear. These were the same people who belittled me, mocked my career, and assumed I would quietly accept their disrespect. Now, they were powerless. Every insult they had thrown my way echoed back, magnified 100-fold. Then came the final twist. I revealed a personal secret they had never suspected. The contingency plan I had developed years ago in case someone tried to sabotage my career. This plan included financial arrangements, contacts in high-level positions, and a network of support that ensured I would never be vulnerable. The revelation left them stunned. They realized, too late, that every attempt to undermine me had only made me stronger, smarter, and more untouchable. As I concluded, I let my gaze sweep across the room. The silence was deafening. I didn't need to yell or threaten. The weight of truth and the magnitude of my accomplishments spoke for themselves. Revenge, I had learned, is not in shouting. It is in precision, patience, and the shocking revelation of power when it's least expected. By the end of the evening, the dynamic had shifted completely. Those who once ridiculed me now approached me with a mix of fear and respect. Some attempted to apologize, while others simply avoided my gaze. I had reclaimed not just my honor, but my control over a narrative that had once been used against me. Sitting alone later that night, I reflected on the journey, the humiliation, the betrayal, the ridicule. It had all led to this moment of vindication. I had transformed anger into strategy, pain into action, and disrespect into undeniable authority. And as I looked ahead, I knew that the story wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving that no matter how deeply life can wound you, resilience and careful planning can turn the tide completely. This was not the end. It was the turning point. And soon, the world would see just how far I could go when pushed to the edge. They thought I was broken, forgotten, and powerless. But the truth I revealed left everyone speechless. The air was thick with tension as I prepared for the final confrontation. Every betrayal, every insult,
Every moment of being underestimated had led me to this point. Years of careful planning, silent endurance, and relentless patience were about to pay off in a way that no one could have predicted. It started with a call I had orchestrated carefully. My former colleagues, the ones who had mocked my Army service, the ones who had laughed when I struggled, received an invitation to a so-called celebration of my retirement. They came, curious and smug, believing they were about to witness my supposed decline. But instead of a celebration, I unveiled the truth. I presented evidence that stunned them. Financial records showing how their negligence had indirectly cost the military millions. Documents proving that my strategic decisions had saved countless lives. And proof that I had quietly amassed the respect of higher-ranking officials, all while enduring their ridicule in silence. Faces paled. Whispers erupted into frantic murmurs. The arrogance they had carried for years dissolved before my eyes. I let them stew in their shame, letting the weight of their ignorance and disrespect sink in. Then came the final twist, one that hit closer to home. I revealed that my most personal sacrifices, the ones they had mocked and dismissed, had quietly secured my family's future. My children who had doubted me, friends who had betrayed me, even my rivals, they were all forced to see my triumph. I wasn't just vindicated, I was untouchable. As I spoke, the room fell silent. No words could undo the years of mockery, but the look of disbelief and regret on their faces was priceless. They finally understood that their arrogance had been their own undoing. Every insult they had thrown my way had only strengthened me, honed my resolve, and prepared me for this ultimate moment. Walking out that night, I felt a sense of liberation unlike anything I had ever known. I had faced betrayal, ridicule, and doubt, and turned it all into a story of triumph. Revenge was sweet, yes, but it was the proof of resilience, strategy, and unwavering self-respect that truly mattered. This was my final victory, not just over those who doubted me, but over every fear, every humiliation, and every challenge that at once seemed insurmountable. And as I looked ahead, I knew that nothing could ever take this sense of power, accomplishment, and dignity away from me.